The dust from the laundry tub made Delilah Durant cough as she scrubbed another man's work shirt against the washboard, her fingers raw and bleeding from the lye soap, though she could calculate compound interest rates in her head faster than the bank manager could with his ledger book. Monticello, Utah in 1883 was a town built on cattle ranching and Mormon settlements where women were expected to cook, clean, and bear children, not solve mathematical equations or manage financial accounts. Delilah had arrived 6 months earlier from Boston with her aunt, who promptly died of consumption within 3 weeks, leaving her niece stranded in a territory that felt as foreign as the moon. The boarding house mistress, Mrs. Halloway, had given her work doing laundry for the ranch hands and townsmen, and Delilah had accepted because a woman alone had few choices. But every day felt like a prison sentence as she stood over boiling water and dirty clothes, her mind dying a slow death while her hands performed labor any able-bodied person could do. She had graduated from a women's academy in Massachusetts with top honors in mathematics and accounting. Her professors had marveled at her ability to see patterns in numbers, to predict market fluctuations, to organize complex financial systems with elegant simplicity. But here, in this dusty Utah town surrounded by red rock canyons and sagebrush, those skills meant nothing. Women did not work in banks. Women did not manage ranch accounts. Women scrubbed clothes until their hands bled and their backs ached, and their minds went numb from the monotony. The water in the tub had gone cold again. Delilah straightened, pressing her fist against her lower back, and gazed out the small window at the main street. A rider was coming into town, and even from a distance she could tell he sat his horse like a man born in the saddle. His hat was pulled low against the afternoon sun, and dust rose from his mount's hooves in golden clouds. She watched him dismount in front of the general store with fluid grace, tying his horse's reins to the hitching post before disappearing inside. "Those sheets are not going to wash themselves," Mrs. Halloway's sharp voice cut through Delilah's momentary escape. The older woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her considerable bosom, her mouth set in its perpetual line of disapproval. "We have 15 more loads to finish before supper." "Yes, madam." Delilah turned back to the washboard, plunging her hands into the cold, soapy water once more. The shock of it made her gasp, but she kept her face neutral. Complaining changed nothing. 3 hours later, with the last of the laundry hanging on lines behind the boarding house, Delilah finally had permission to walk to the general store for supplies. Mrs. Halloway needed thread, flour, and baking soda, and had given Delilah a list written in cramped handwriting. The evening air was cooler now, a blessing after the heat of the laundry room, and Delilah took her time walking down the wooden sidewalk. Her dress was faded and damp with perspiration, her hair escaping from its pins, but she held her head high. Dignity cost nothing. The general store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and sawdust. Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, was helping another customer, so Delilah browsed the shelves while she waited. She found herself standing near a bulletin board covered with notices and wanted posters. One notice caught her eye, written in bold, confident handwriting. "Seeking experienced bookkeeper for large cattle operation, must be proficient in accounts, inventory management, and financial forecasting. Competitive wages. Inquire at the Anderson Ranch, 5 miles west of town." Delilah's heart began to pound. She read the notice 3 times, memorizing every word. A bookkeeper position. It was exactly what she was trained to do, what she longed to do. But would they hire a woman? The notice did not specify male applicants only, which was unusual. Most employers simply assumed no woman would apply. "Can I help you find something, Miss Durant?" Mr. Peterson had finished with his other customer and was looking at her expectantly. "Yes, please." She pulled her gaze from the notice and handed him Mrs. Halloway's list. While he gathered the items, she worked up her courage. "Mr. Peterson, that notice on the board about the bookkeeper position at the Anderson Ranch, is that position still available?" The storekeeper glanced at the bulletin board, then back at her with surprise. Far as I know, Mr. Anderson posted that 3 weeks ago and has not found anyone suitable yet. Had two applicants, but neither worked out. One could not add properly, and the other drank himself unconscious the second day. He paused, studying her with new interest. You would not be thinking of applying, would you? I am qualified, Delilah said quietly. I have formal training in accounting and mathematics. Mr. Peterson let out a low whistle. Well, I will be. Boston educated, are you not? I heard Mrs. Halloway mention it once. At her nod, he continued wrapping the supplies in brown paper. Blake Anderson is a fair man. I will give him that. Does not hold with a lot of the nonsense some folks do. His ranch is the biggest operation in the county, runs about 5,000 head of cattle. He is a hard worker and expects the same from his people, but he pays well and treats them right. If you are serious about applying, I would ride out there tomorrow morning. He usually conducts business in his office before heading out to check the herds. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I appreciate the information. Delilah paid for the supplies with Mrs. Halloway's coins and walked back to the boarding house with her mind racing. Could she really do this? Apply for a position that no woman in Monticello had ever held? The worst that could happen was rejection, and she was already living a life of wasted potential. At least if she tried, she would know she had fought for something better. That night, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, Delilah sat on her narrow bed in the tiny room she rented and composed a letter by candlelight. She outlined her education, her skills, and her experience helping her father manage his shipping company's accounts before his death 5 years earlier. She kept her handwriting neat and professional, her tone confident but not arrogant. When she finished, she read it over 3 times, making small corrections before folding it carefully and sealing it with a drop of wax. The next morning, before Mrs. Halloway could assign her the day's tasks, Delilah announced she needed the day off for personal business. Personal business? Mrs. Halloway repeated, her eyebrows rising. What sort of personal business could you possibly have? I am applying for a different position. Delilah kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I will understand if you need to let me go, but I have to try for this opportunity. Mrs. Halloway's expression cycled through surprise, irritation, and finally grudging respect. What sort of position? Bookkeeper at the Anderson Ranch. Blake Anderson's place? Mrs. Halloway actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Girl, they will never hire a woman for that job. You are wasting your time. Perhaps, Delilah agreed, but it is my time to waste. She borrowed a horse from the livery stable, using the last of her personal savings to pay the rental fee, and rode west out of town as the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky. The landscape was breathtaking in its stark beauty, red rock formations rising from the earth like ancient cathedrals, scrub brush and juniper trees clinging to life in the arid soil, and mountains in the distance still capped with snow despite the summer heat. Delilah had grown up surrounded by brick buildings and cobblestone streets, and even after 6 months in Utah, she still found the wild openness both terrifying and exhilarating. The Anderson Ranch sprawled across a vast valley with a main house built of timber and stone, several barns, a bunkhouse, and numerous corrals. Cattle dotted the landscape like rust-colored stones. Delilah dismounted in front of the main house, tying her borrowed horse next to several others, and climbed the steps to the wide front porch. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them together and knocked firmly on the door before she could lose her nerve. A Mexican woman in her 50s answered, her dark eyes kind. Yes, miss. Can I help you? I am here to see Mr. Anderson about the bookkeeper position. I have a letter of application. Delilah held up the sealed envelope. The woman's surprise was evident, but she stepped back and gestured for Delilah to enter. Please wait in the parlor. I will see if Senor Anderson is available. The interior of the house was cooler and more refined than Delilah had expected. The furniture was well made, the floors polished, and the windows large enough to let in plenty of light. She perched on the edge of a leather chair, her letter gripped in both hands, and tried to calm her breathing. Heavy footsteps approached, and then a man filled the doorway. Delilah's first thought was that he looked nothing like a ranch owner. Her second thought was that he looked exactly like a ranch owner. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed a trim. His eyes were a startling blue-green, the color of deep water, and they assessed her with sharp intelligence. He wore work-clothes denim pants, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and boots worn soft with use. He was perhaps 30 years old, and there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested both confidence and weariness. "I am Blake Anderson," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Rosa says you are here about the bookkeeper position?" Delilah stood, grateful that her voice did not shake when she spoke. "Yes, sir. I am Delilah Durant. I have formal training in accounting and mathematics, and I believe I am qualified for the position you advertised." She held out the letter. Blake Anderson crossed the room and took the envelope, but his eyes never left her face. "You understand this is a bookkeeping position for a cattle ranch? The work involves managing accounts for dozens of employees, tracking inventory for thousands of head of cattle, negotiating with buyers, and forecasting expenses and profits months in advance. It is not simple arithmetic." "I understand completely." Delilah met his gaze without flinching. "I can calculate compound interest in my head, I can organize complex ledger systems, and I can identify patterns in financial data that predict market trends. I graduated top of my class from the Pembroke Academy for Young Women in Boston, and I assisted my father in managing a shipping company with annual revenues exceeding $100,000. What I cannot do well is laundry, though that is how I have been spending my days for the past 6 months." Something that might have been amusement flickered in Blake Anderson's eyes. He broke the seal on the envelope and read her letter, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched until Delilah's nerves felt like overstretched wire. Finally, he looked up. "Why did you come to Monticello?" "I came with my aunt. She died 3 weeks after we arrived. I had no means to return to Boston, so I took work where I could find it." "And Mrs. Halloway's boarding house was the best you could find?" "It was the only option available to a single woman with no family connections." Blake Anderson nodded slowly, still studying her. "Miss Durant, I am going to be frank with you. I have had this position advertised for 3 weeks. I have interviewed 2 men, both of whom came highly recommended, and both of whom proved incompetent. My previous bookkeeper retired and moved to California to live with his daughter. Before I hire anyone, I need to know they can actually do the work. Would you be willing to take a test?" Relief flooded through Delilah. "Yes, absolutely. Come with me." He led her down a hallway to a large office with windows overlooking the ranch yard. The room was organized chaos ledgers stacked on a massive oak desk, papers covered with figures, filing cabinets along one wall, and maps of the territory pinned to another. Blake gestured to the desk. "These are the accounts for the past 3 months. They are a mess because I have been trying to manage them myself while running the ranch, and I am a cattleman, not a mathematician. I need you to review these ledgers, identify any errors, and give me an accurate total of our current operating expenses versus revenue. Also, project what our expenses will be for the next quarter based on current trends. You have 2 hours." Delilah removed her shawl and rolled up her sleeves. "I will have it done in 90 minutes. Blake's eyebrows rose. "Confident." "Realistic," she corrected and sat down at the desk. He left her alone, and Delilah immediately immersed herself in the numbers. It was like coming home after a long exile. Her mind, so long starved for meaningful work, seized on the challenge with fierce joy. The ledgers were indeed a mess, entries made in haste, some calculations done incorrectly, and the organizational system haphazard at best. But beneath the chaos, she could see the structure of a successful operation. The ranch was profitable, but not as profitable as it could be. There were inefficiencies in purchasing, opportunities being missed in market timing, and some expenses that seemed unnecessarily high. She worked steadily, creating clear columns on fresh paper, reorganizing the information, correcting errors, and building a comprehensive picture of the ranch's finances. When she was finished, she had not only completed the assigned task, but also created a list of recommendations for improving profitability. Blake Anderson returned in exactly 90 minutes, as though he had been watching a clock. He found Delilah standing by the window, stretching her back, her work laid out neatly on the desk. Finished already? He moved to the desk and picked up her papers. Delilah watched his face as he read, trying to gauge his reaction. His expression remained neutral until he reached the third page, and then his eyebrows drew together. He flipped back to the first page, checking her figures, then forward again. You found the error I have been trying to locate for 2 months, he said finally. The feed supplier has been overcharging us by 15% on every order. Yes, sir. The discrepancy shows up when you compare the invoices against market rates for the same period. It is subtle enough to miss if you are not looking for patterns, but consistent enough to indicate deliberate overcharging rather than simple error. Blake set down the papers and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Miss Durant, you said you could do this work in 90 minutes. You were right. In fact, this is better work than my previous bookkeeper ever produced, and he had 30 years of experience. He paused, and something that looked like relief crossed his features. The job is yours if you want it. Room and board included, plus $40 a month. $40 a month. Delilah was currently earning $12 a month at the boarding house, and that was considered generous for laundry work. She struggled to keep her voice level. I want it. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Call me Blake. Everyone here does. He extended his hand, and when Delilah shook it, his grip was firm and warm. When can you start? Tomorrow morning, if that suits you. It suits me fine. He released her hand, and for a moment, they stood looking at each other in the sun-filled office. Blake Anderson's eyes held something that made Delilah's breath catch recognition, perhaps, or respect. Whatever it was, it made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in a very long time. There is one thing you should know, Blake said, his tone turning serious. Some of the ranch hands are going to have opinions about a woman doing this work. Some of the folks in town, too. I do not tolerate disrespect toward anyone who works for me, but you should be prepared for some resistance. I have been doing laundry for 6 months while my brain rotted, Delilah said quietly. I can handle some disapproving opinions. Blake's expression shifted into something that was definitely a smile, though it was gone almost before she registered it. I believe you can. Come on, I will introduce you to Rosa. She manages the house and will show you to your room. The room Blake showed her to was in the main house, on the second floor, with a view of the mountains. It was 3 times the size of her cramped space at the boarding house, with a real bed, a wardrobe, a desk, and even a small bookshelf. Delilah stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. This is too much, she said. I expected I would stay in the bunkhouse or perhaps a small cabin. The bunkhouse is for the ranch hands. The foreman has a cabin. You will be working closely with me on the ranch finances, so it makes sense for you to be in the main house where the office is located. Blake leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Besides, Rosa has been after me to get someone else in this house. She says it is too quiet with just the 2 of us. Just the 2 of you? Delilah did not mean to pry, but the question escaped before she could stop it. I am not married, if that is what you are asking. Rosa has worked for my family since I was a boy. When my parents died 4 years ago, she stayed on. He said it matter-of-factly, but Delilah heard the echo of old grief in his voice. Take the rest of the day to get settled. Tomorrow morning, we will go over the ranch operations in detail so you understand what you will be managing. Rosa serves breakfast at 6. He left before Delilah could respond, his boots heavy on the hallway floorboards. She stepped fully into the room and closed the door, then sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her face. She was shaking, but not from fear, from relief, from the sudden dizzying sense that her life had just changed course in a way she had not dared to hope for. Returning to the boarding house to collect her belongings was less pleasant. Mrs. Holloway made her feelings clear about Delilah's unnatural ambitions and unwomanly behavior, but she could not refuse to return Delilah's things. The other women who worked there, two laundresses and a cook, looked at Delilah with a mixture of envy and disapproval as she packed her small trunk. Only the youngest laundress, a girl named Mary, whispered a shy congratulations as Delilah left. By nightfall, Delilah was unpacking her belongings in her new room at the Anderson Ranch. Rosa had brought up fresh linens and towels and had invited Delilah to join her and Blake for supper. The meal was served in a dining room that could have seated 12 but held only 3 and consisted of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. The food was simple but delicious, infinitely better than the thin gruel served at the boarding house. Blake asked about her background, and Delilah found herself talking more freely than she had in months. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her father's shipping business, about her mother dying when she was young, and her father encouraging her education despite societal disapproval. She told him about her father's sudden death from a heart condition, about the business being sold to pay debts she had not known existed, about her aunt offering to take her west for a fresh start. "Your aunt did not know she was sick?" Blake asked. "She knew. She did not tell me." Delilah's throat tightened at the memory. "I think she wanted to give me a chance to start over somewhere new, and she knew I would not come if I thought she was dying. She held on just long enough to see me established somewhere safe, even if that somewhere was Mrs. Holloway's boarding house." Rosa made a sympathetic sound and patted Delilah's hand. Blake's expression had turned thoughtful. "She gave you what she could," he said, "and now you are making something of it. That takes courage." After supper, Delilah retired to her room and stood at the window, looking out at the vast darkness of the Utah Territory. Stars crowded the sky in impossible numbers, so different from the light-washed skies of Boston. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Delilah wrapped her arms around herself and let out a long breath. Tomorrow, her real work would begin. Tomorrow, she would prove that her talent had value, that she was more than just another pair of hands to scrub laundry or cook meals. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, Delilah woke before dawn, dressed in her most practical dress, and made her way downstairs. She found Blake already in the kitchen, drinking coffee and reviewing a list of tasks. He looked up when she entered and gestured to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. We have a lot to cover today." They spent the morning in the office while Blake explained the full scope of the ranch operations. He ran 5,000 head of cattle across 20,000 acres, employed 32 men full-time and a dozen more during peak seasons, and conducted business with buyers from Denver, Cheyenne, and as far east as Chicago. The financial complexity was staggering, exactly the kind of challenge Delilah had been craving. Blake proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but thorough. He did not talk down to her or assume she would not understand technical details. Instead, he treated her like the educated professional she was, explaining the specifics of the cattle business, but trusting her to grasp the underlying financial principles. By midday, Delilah's head was spinning with information about cattle weights, market prices, feed costs, veterinary expenses, payroll schedules, and seasonal variations. "Questions?" Blake asked, leaning back in his chair. "About 100, Delilah admitted. "But I will work through most of them as I organize the records. The main question is where you want me to start. The most urgent need seems to be getting the current accounts in order and establishing a reliable system for ongoing tracking." "That is exactly right." Blake's approval was evident in his voice. "Start there. Once we have a clear picture of where we stand, we can start planning for the future more strategically." Over the next 2 weeks, Delilah immersed herself in the work. She spent long hours in the office, emerging only for meals and sleep. She reorganized the entire filing system, created new ledgers with clear categories and consistent formatting, tracked down missing receipts and invoices, and built a comprehensive picture of the ranch's financial health. The work was demanding and sometimes frustrating, but it was also deeply satisfying. Her mind felt alive again, engaged and challenged and purposeful. Blake checked in with her regularly, sometimes several times a day, and Delilah found herself looking forward to these visits more than was strictly professional. He had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. He also had a way of looking at her when she explained complex financial concepts that made her feel truly heard, as though her words mattered in a way that went beyond their business relationship. The ranch hands were a different story. Most of them were polite but distant, clearly uncertain what to make of a woman working in the office alongside their boss. A few were openly skeptical, making comments just loud enough for her to overhear about fancy Boston education and women who do not know their place. Delilah ignored them, focusing on her work and trusting that results would speak louder than opinions. Then came the incident with Garrett Hayes, the ranch's assistant foreman. He was a man in his late 30s, capable with cattle, but resentful of anyone he perceived as having authority without earning it through physical labor. He cornered Delilah one afternoon as she was walking from the main house to the barn to check on some supply invoices. "You think you are pretty smart, do not you?" Garrett blocked her path, his arms crossed and his expression hostile. "Coming in here with your books and your Boston manners, acting like you know something about running a ranch." Delilah kept her voice level. "I know about managing the finances of a ranch. That is what Mr. Anderson hired me to do." "Mr. Anderson?" Garrett mimicked her accent mockingly. "He hired you because you are a pretty face, not because you can actually do the work. We all know how this goes. Give it a month and you will be warming his bed instead of working in his office." The accusation was so crude and so far from the truth that Delilah felt her face flame. But before she could respond, Blake's voice cut through the afternoon air like a whip. "Hayes, you are fired. You have 1 hour to pack your things and get off my property." Both Delilah and Garrett spun around. Blake stood 10 feet away, his expression harder than stone. He must have come around the corner of the barn just as Garrett was speaking. "Boss, I did not mean—" Garrett started, his bravado crumbling. "You meant exactly what you said, and I do not tolerate that kind of disrespect toward anyone who works for me." Blake's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "I have overlooked your attitude before because you are good with the cattle, but that ends now. 1 hour. If you are not gone by then, I will have the foreman escort you off the property." Garrett's face cycled through several shades of red, but he must have recognized that Blake was serious. He shot Delilah a look of pure venom, then stalked toward the bunkhouse. Blake watched him go, then turned to Delilah. "Are you all right?" "I am fine." Delilah was surprised to find it was true. She had been insulted, but not hurt. "You did not have to fire him on my account." "Yes, I did." Blake's expression softened slightly. "Not just on your account, though I will not have anyone speaking to you that way, but also because a man who thinks like that has no place on my ranch. He works for me. He respects my decisions, including the decision to hire you. If he cannot do that, he does not belong here." Something warm unfurled in Delilah's chest. Not gratitude exactly, though she was grateful. Something more fundamental, the sense of being defended, of having her worth recognized and protected. It had been a long time since anyone had stood up for her like that. "Thank you," she said softly. Blake held her gaze for a long moment. "You do not need to thank me for treating you fairly. That is just basic decency." He paused, then added, "Though I do appreciate having someone around who understands the difference between a balance sheet and a bill of sale. You have no idea how much easier you have made my life in the past 2 weeks." "I think I have some idea," Delilah said, allowing herself a small smile. "Your previous system was a disaster." That surprised a laugh out of Blake, and the tension of the moment broke. They walked together back to the office, discussing the supply invoices Delilah had been going to check, and by the time they reached the house, the incident with Garrett felt like a distant memory. But that night, lying in her comfortable bed and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness, Delilah found herself thinking about Blake Anderson in ways that had nothing to do with ledgers and accounts. She thought about the way he had defended her without hesitation, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face, the way he listened when she talked about financial projections as though she were sharing something important rather than boring him with details. She thought about his hands, work roughened and capable, and the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence. This is dangerous, she told herself. He is your employer. You need this job. You cannot afford to develop feelings for a man who has all the power in this arrangement. But her heart, it seemed, was not interested in practical considerations. The summer deepened, and with it, Delilah's integration into ranch life. She fell into a rhythm of early mornings and long workdays, but unlike her time at the boarding house, these days left her energized rather than depleted. Blake began consulting her on business decisions, valuing her input on when to sell cattle, which suppliers to use, and how to negotiate better prices. She proved herself right more often than not, and gradually even the skeptical ranch hands began to respect her. She also began to see Blake in different contexts. He was not just a ranch owner who sat in an office. He worked alongside his men, riding out before dawn to check on the herds, repairing fences, helping with brandings and roundups. He came back to the house at day's end covered in dust and sweat, but he always took time to check in with Delilah about the day's business before cleaning up for supper. One evening in late July, Delilah was working in the office after supper, finishing up some correspondence with a buyer in Denver when Blake appeared in the doorway. He had bathed and changed into clean clothes, his dark hair still damp. "Still working?" he asked. "Almost done. I want to get this letter in tomorrow's mail." Delilah signed her name with a flourish and blotted the ink. "There, one more contract secured at a better price than last year." "You are going to make me a rich man," Blake said, moving into the room. He picked up the letter and read it, then shook his head admiringly. "You just negotiated terms that my previous bookkeeper would have said were impossible. How do you do that?" "I pay attention to what buyers need and what we can offer. Then I find the overlap and structure a deal that benefits both parties." Delilah stood and began tidying the desk. "It is not magic, just strategy. It feels like magic from where I am standing." Blake set down the letter and looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Delilah, I need to tell you something. When I posted that advertisement, I was desperate. I had convinced myself I would have to hire someone incompetent just to have another set of hands. And then you walked into my parlor, and I thought there was no way this Boston-educated woman with more brains than half the men in the county was going to be able to do what I needed. I am not proud of that assumption. But you gave me a chance anyway," Delilah said quietly, "because I was desperate enough to test you, even though I did not really believe you would succeed." Blake's expression was rueful. "I am glad I was wrong. You have not just met my expectations, Delilah. You have exceeded them in every possible way. This ranch is better because you are here. I am better because you are here." The last sentence hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Delilah's heart was beating so hard she was certain Blake could hear it. They were standing close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue-green eyes, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap on his skin. "Blake," she said, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips brushed her cheek, and Delilah felt the touch all the way to her toes. "I am your employer," Blake said, his voice rough, "and I know that creates an imbalance of power that makes this complicated. But I need you to know that I have feelings for you that have nothing to do with business. You are brilliant and brave and so beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes. And if there is any chance you feel the same way, I would very much like to court you properly. But if you do not, or if this makes you uncomfortable, we will never speak of it again, and nothing about your position here will change. You have my word on that." Delilah's breath caught. She had spent so many nights telling herself that anything between them was impossible, that she was imagining the connection she felt. And now here he was, offering her everything she had been afraid to want. I feel the same way, she whispered. I have for weeks. I just did not think you could possibly. She did not get to finish the sentence because Blake was kissing her, his hands cradling her face with infinite gentleness. The kiss was soft and questioning at first, then deeper as Delilah responded, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Delilah felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. I have wanted to do that since the day you finished reorganizing the filing system, Blake murmured against her hair. You looked so triumphant, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to kiss you. Delilah laughed breathlessly. The filing system. That is what did it. You have no idea how attractive competence is. Blake pulled back just enough to look at her, his expression tender. Delilah Durant, would you allow me to court you? Yes, Delilah said, and felt joy bubble up inside her like champagne. Yes, absolutely, yes. Courting while living in the same house and working together every day created an interesting dynamic. Blake was scrupulously proper, especially when Rosa or any of the ranch hands were around. But in private moments, a stolen kiss in the office, after everyone had gone to bed, holding hands while they walked the property in the evening, long conversations on the front porch under the stars, their relationship deepened and grew. Blake told her about his parents, who had built the ranch from nothing and had taught him everything about cattle and hard work and integrity. He told her about the loneliness of the past 4 years, managing the ranch alone, while all his friends married and started families. He told her about his dreams of building something lasting, a legacy that would endure. Delilah told him about her father, who had believed in her potential when the rest of the world told her that women did not need education. She told him about the shame of losing everything after his death, of being dependent on charity and goodwill. She told him about the suffocating despair of the boarding house, of feeling her mind dying a little more each day she spent scrubbing clothes. I will never let you feel that way again, Blake promised one evening as they sat together on the porch swing, Delilah tucked against his side. Your mind is one of the most beautiful things about you, and watching you work is a privilege. No one has ever said anything like that to me before, Delilah admitted. Most men are threatened by women who can think. Then most men are fools, Blake said simply, and kissed her temple. As summer turned to fall, the ranch prepared for the annual cattle drive to the railhead in Colorado. It was a massive undertaking that would take 3 weeks and involve most of the ranch hands. Blake would lead the drive himself, as he always did, and Delilah would stay behind to manage the ranch operations and handle any business that arose in his absence. The night before Blake was set to leave, they sat together in the office going over final details. Delilah had prepared detailed projections for every possible scenario, contingency plans for supply issues, and a schedule for maintaining operations during the drive. Blake reviewed her work with a mixture of admiration and amusement. You have thought of everything, he said, including what to do if we get hit by a freak snowstorm in September, which has not happened in this territory in 30 years. It is better to be prepared, Delilah said primly, though she was smiling. You never know what might happen. Blake set down the papers and pulled her into his arms. I am going to miss you. 3 weeks feels like forever. You will be too busy wrangling cattle to miss me very much, Delilah said, but she held him tight. The thought of 3 weeks without him created a hollow ache in her chest. Not possible. Blake kissed her, slow and deep. When they broke apart, his expression was serious. Delilah, when I come back, there is something important I want to talk to you about, a question I want to ask. Will you wait for me? Delilah's heart leaped. She knew what he was asking, even if he was not saying the words outright. I will wait for you. I will be right here when you get back. Good. Blake kissed her again, and Delilah memorized the feel of it, storing the memory against the lonely weeks ahead. The next morning, she stood on the porch with Rosa and watched the men ride out with the massive herd of cattle. Blake turned in his saddle at the last moment and tipped his hat to her, and Delilah waved until he was out of sight. Then she went into the office and got to work. The 3 weeks passed slowly. Delilah kept herself busy managing the ranch operations, handling correspondence, and working on long-term financial projections. She also spent time with Rosa, who became something of a friend and mentor. The older woman had clearly figured out what was developing between Delilah and Blake, and she approved. "That boy needs someone with sense," Rosa said one evening as they prepared dinner together. "He has been alone too long, working too hard. You are good for him, and he is good for you, yes? He sees who you really are." "Yes," Delilah said softly. "He does." On the 19th day, a rider came from town with news. There had been trouble on the cattle drive. A flash flood in Colorado had scattered part of the herd and injured several men. Blake was fine, but they would be delayed at least another week while they regrouped and recovered the lost cattle. Delilah's relief that Blake was unharmed was immediately followed by concern for the financial implications. She sat down and recalculated their projections, factoring in the delay, potential cattle loss, and additional expenses. Then she composed a letter to Blake outlining several options for minimizing the financial damage, including negotiating with alternate buyers if they could not make their original schedule. She sent it by express rider, paying extra to ensure it reached the drive quickly. 4 days later, a rider returned with a brief note from Blake. "Your suggestion saved us at least $3,000. You are brilliant. Cannot wait to see you. B." Delilah pressed the note to her chest and allowed herself a moment of pure happiness. Blake returned on a cool October morning, 4 weeks after he had left. Delilah saw the dust cloud from the returning riders and forced herself to remain in the office, to not run out to meet him like an overwrought heroine in a dime novel. But when his boots sounded on the porch and she heard him call her name, she could not stop herself from meeting him in the hallway. They came together in a fierce embrace, Blake lifting her off her feet and burying his face in her hair. He smelled of horses and dust and open sky, and Delilah did not care. She was whole again in a way she had not been for 4 weeks. "I missed you," Blake said roughly. "God, Delilah, I missed you so much." "I missed you too." Delilah pulled back just enough to look at his face. He was thinner, more weathered, with new lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "Are you all right? The message said you were fine, but I am fine now." Blake set her down, but kept his arms around her. "We lost about 50 head in the flood, and 3 men got banged up, but nothing serious. Your suggestions about the alternate buyers meant we only lost 2 days instead of 2 weeks. You probably saved the ranch from serious financial trouble." "I just did my job," Delilah said, but she could not help feeling pleased. "No, you did much more than that." Blake's expression turned serious. "Delilah, I said I had a question for you. I know it has only been a few months, and maybe this is too fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I do not want to court you for years and wonder if you will say yes. I want to marry you. I want you to be my partner in every sense of the word, in the ranch and in life. I want to build a future with you." He was not kneeling, and he did not have a ring ready, but the proposal was perfect in its honesty and directness. Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Blake, I will marry you." His kiss tasted like homecoming and promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I should probably do this properly," Blake said. "Ask your family for permission. Get a ring." "I have no family to ask, and I do not need a fancy ring," Delilah interrupted. "I just need you." "You have me," Blake promised, "for as long as you will have me." From the kitchen, they heard Rosa's voice call out, "About time! I have been waiting for you two to figure this out for months." They both laughed, and the sound filled the house with warmth. They were married in November in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Rosa and the ranch hands as witnesses. The local minister performed the service on the front porch, with the vast Utah landscape as a backdrop. Delilah wore a new dress she and Rosa had sewn together, pale blue with lace at the collar and cuffs. Blake wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed her with such tenderness that Delilah felt her heart might burst from happiness. This was what she had never dared to dream of, being valued, not for her beauty or her domestic skills, but for her mind and her abilities, being loved for exactly who she was. The ranch hands had organized a celebration with food and music, and the party lasted well into the evening. Even the men who had been skeptical of Delilah at first came forward to offer their congratulations and admit they had been wrong about her. It felt like acceptance, like belonging. That night, in the bedroom they now shared, Blake and Delilah lay in each other's arms and talked about their future. Blake wanted to expand the ranch, to buy more land and increase the herd. Delilah had ideas about diversifying their investments, about putting money into land development, and even the emerging railroad industry. Together they dreamed and planned, two minds working in perfect harmony. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Blake said, running his fingers through her hair. "I get to work with you every day. I get to see your mind tackle problems and find solutions. I never have to wonder if you are bored or frustrated because you are doing exactly what you were meant to do. The best part for me is that you saw me," Delilah said softly. "You saw my talent and you did not feel threatened by it. You gave me work that matched my gifts, and in doing so, you gave me back my life." "No," Blake corrected, pulling her closer. "You gave yourself your life back. You were brave enough to apply for that job, brave enough to take the test, brave enough to prove yourself every single day. I just had the good sense to recognize what was right in front of me." Delilah kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. In his arms, she felt completely herself, brilliant, capable, feminine, strong. All the things she had been told were contradictory turned out to be complementary. She did not have to diminish any part of herself to be loved. She just had to find the right person to see her. The years that followed were filled with hard work, challenges, and joy. Delilah transformed the ranch's financial operations, implementing systems that became models for other large ranching operations in the territory. She negotiated contracts that other ranch owners said were impossible, predicted market trends with uncanny accuracy, and turned the Anderson Ranch into one of the most profitable operations in Utah. But she also found time for the softer pleasures of life. She and Blake rode together across their land, exploring the canyons and mesas. They hosted dinners for neighboring ranchers, and Delilah found herself becoming an informal financial advisor to several other operations. She formed friendships with other educated women in the territory, women who had also been told their talents were wasted, and together they created a support network that helped each other thrive. In the spring of 1885, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both her and Blake with overwhelming joy, though Delilah insisted on continuing to work until the very last weeks of her pregnancy. Blake worried, but he also understood that her work was not separate from her identity, it was part of who she was. Their son was born in August, a healthy, loud baby with Blake's dark hair and what Rosa swore was Delilah's stubborn determination. They named him Thomas, after Delilah's father. Blake proved to be a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, and Delilah discovered that motherhood did not diminish her other abilities. She simply expanded to include this new role, finding ways to balance work and family that felt natural rather than forced. Rosa doted on the baby, and the ranch hands were surprisingly gentle with the tiny new boss. Even the gruffest cowboys softened when Thomas looked at them with his wide blue eyes. 2 years later, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, after Blake's mother. Catherine had her mother's honey-colored hair and a temperament that was already showing signs of sharp intelligence. Delilah looked at her daughter and thought about the world she would grow up in and promised herself that Catherine would never feel limited by her gender. She would have every opportunity, every chance to develop her own gifts, whatever they might be. By 1887, The Anderson Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the Utah Territory. Blake and Delilah had expanded their holdings, invested wisely in emerging industries, and built a reputation for fair dealing and innovative business practices. Other ranchers came to them for advice. Eastern investors sought their partnership. The ranch that had been struggling when Delilah arrived was now a model of prosperity. But more importantly, Delilah and Blake had built a marriage based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and deep love. They still worked together in the office, though now they often had one or both children playing nearby. They still rode out together to check the herds when time allowed. They still sat on the front porch in the evenings, talking about dreams and plans, Blake's arm around Delilah's shoulders and her head resting on his chest. One evening in late summer, as the sun painted the red rocks gold and purple, Blake looked at his wife and marveled at how his life had changed. 4 years ago, he had been drowning in paperwork and loneliness, convinced he would never find someone who could understand both sides of his life, the business and the land, the numbers and the cattle. And then Delilah had walked into his parlor with her Boston education and her desperate courage, and everything had fallen into place. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, noticing his gaze. "How lucky I am," Blake said simply. "How close I came to hiring someone incompetent just to fill the position. How you could have given up after your aunt died and found a way back to Boston. How many things had to go exactly right for us to end up here." "I do not believe in luck," Delilah said, her practical nature asserting itself. "I believe in probability and choice. We chose each other, Blake. That is what matters." "We did," Blake agreed, "but I still feel lucky." Thomas, now 3 years old, came running around the corner of the house, chasing one of the ranch dogs. Catherine toddled after him, her determination evident in every step. Rosa followed at a more sedate pace, keeping watch over both children. "Your children are going to be running this ranch one day," Rosa said, settling into a rocking chair. "Thomas with the cattle, Catherine with the books. Just like their parents." "Maybe," Delilah said, smiling, as she watched her children play. "Or maybe they will want to do something completely different. Either way, we will make sure they have the skills and education to choose." Blake pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Whatever they choose, they will know their mother proved that talent should never be wasted, that gifts should be recognized and valued regardless of who possesses them. And they will know their father was wise enough to see past convention and give someone a chance when no one else would," Delilah added. "That is your legacy, Blake. You changed my life because you were willing to look at what I could do rather than what society said I should do." "Best decision I ever made," Blake murmured. As the evening deepened into night and the stars began to emerge in the vast Utah sky, the Anderson family remained on the porch together. The ranch was thriving, the business was prosperous, and 2 children played at their parents' feet. But the real success was quieter, more personal, a brilliant woman who had been given work that matched her gifts, and a wise man who had recognized that talent when he saw it. In the years that followed, the Anderson Ranch continued to grow. Thomas and Catherine grew up surrounded by both cattle and ledger books, learning that intelligence and hard work were valued equally in their family. The ranch became known not just for its successful cattle operations, but for its progressive business practices and its willingness to hire based on ability rather than gender or convention. In 1890, when Utah Territory was preparing for statehood, Blake was asked to serve on a committee helping to establish business regulations for the new state. He insisted that Delilah serve alongside him, and despite initial resistance from other committee members, her expertise proved invaluable. She helped draft regulations that protected small ranchers while encouraging economic growth, and her financial models were adopted across the territory. The little girl who had once been told women did not need education, the young woman who had scrubbed laundry while her brilliant mind atrophied, had become one of the most respected business minds in Utah. And she had done it not by becoming less feminine or less herself, but by finding a partner who recognized her gifts and gave her the opportunity to use them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake took Delilah back to the office where she had taken that first test, where he had offered her the job that changed everything. The room had been updated over the years, but it still held the same massive desk and the same view of the ranch yard. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Blake asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out the window. "When I told you that you had 2 hours to complete the test." "I said I would have it done in 90 minutes, Delilah recalled, smiling at the memory of her younger, more desperate self. "You were so confident, so certain of your abilities, even though you had been told for months that they did not matter." Blake turned her in his arms to face him. "I fell a little bit in love with you right then, even though I did not know it yet. That combination of brilliance and courage and quiet strength, I had never met anyone like you." "And I fell in love with you when you defended me to Garrett Hayes," Delilah said, reaching up to cup his face. "When you made it clear that my worth was not up for debate, that you had hired me because I was the best person for the job. That was when I knew you were different from every other man I had met." "We are good together," Blake said simply. "In business, in life, in everything. You make me better, Delilah. You always have. And you gave me the freedom to be everything I was meant to be," Delilah replied. "You saw my talent when it was being wasted on work anyone could do. And you gave me work that matched my gifts. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They kissed in the office where their partnership had begun, surrounded by the evidence of their shared success ledgers that told the story of a thriving ranch, maps that showed their expanded holdings, and contracts that bore both their signatures. Outside, the sun was setting over the red rocks of Utah, painting the world in gold and crimson. Their children were playing in the yard under Rosa's watchful eye, their laughter drifting through the open windows. 10 years earlier, Delilah had stood in Mrs. Holloway's laundry room, her hands raw and her spirit dying, and had seen a notice for a bookkeeper position that seemed impossibly out of reach. She had taken a chance, ridden out to a ranch owned by a stranger, and asked for the opportunity to prove herself. That single act of courage had changed everything. Blake had taken a chance too, setting aside his assumptions about what a woman could or could not do, and judging her solely on her abilities. He had seen her talent, recognized her worth, and given her the opportunity she needed. And in doing so, he had found not just an excellent bookkeeper, but a partner, a friend, and a wife who completed him in ways he had not known he needed. Their story was not about rescue or salvation. It was about recognition and opportunity, about talent being valued and gifts being honored. It was about two people finding each other at exactly the right moment and choosing to build something beautiful together. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky and the Anderson family gathered for dinner, Blake and Delilah, Thomas and Catherine, and faithful Rosa, who had been there from the beginning, there was a sense of deep contentment that filled the house. This was what happiness looked like: meaningful work, mutual respect, children raised with love and high expectations, and a partnership built on seeing and valuing each other completely. Delilah looked around the dinner table at the family she and Blake had built, at the life they had created through hard work and love, and felt profound gratitude. She had come to Utah, a desperate young woman with nowhere else to turn, her talent wasted and her future uncertain. Now she was home, truly home, in a place where her gifts were not just accepted, but celebrated, where she could be brilliant and feminine, strong and tender, a businesswoman and a mother and a wife. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" Catherine asked, noticing her mother's thoughtful expression. "I am thinking about how lucky we are," Delilah said, reaching across the table to squeeze Blake's hand. He smiled at her, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Not luck," Blake reminded her gently, echoing her own words back to her. "Choice. We chose this every day." "Then I am thinking about how grateful I am for the choices we have made," Delilah amended, "and how excited I am for all the choices still to come." After dinner, After the children were tucked into bed and Rosa had retired to her own room, Blake and Delilah stood together on the front porch as they had done countless times before. The night air was cool and clear, scented with sagebrush and possibility. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, a sound that had become as familiar as breathing. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had never posted that advertisement? Delilah asked quietly. Sometimes, Blake admitted, I probably would have struggled along, making mistakes, never quite finding the right person to help me build the ranch into what it could be. I would have been successful enough, but lonely, incomplete. He pulled her closer. What about you? What if you had never seen that notice or had not been brave enough to apply? Delilah shuddered. I would still be at the boarding house or somewhere similar. My talent would have continued to be wasted on work anyone could do. Eventually, I would have forgotten what it felt like to use my mind for anything meaningful. I would have survived, but I would not have really lived. Instead, we found each other, Blake said, and we built something extraordinary. We did, Delilah agreed. She thought about the years ahead, watching their children grow, continuing to build the ranch, perhaps seeing Utah achieve statehood, growing old together while still working side by side. It was a future full of challenge and purpose and love, exactly the kind of future she had once thought impossible. The Wild West was not an easy place, especially for a woman who refused to be confined by society's expectations, but it was also a place where possibility lived, where someone brave enough to take a chance could build a life beyond their wildest dreams. Delilah had come west with nothing but her education and her courage, and she had found everything that mattered: purpose, partnership, and a love that honored every part of who she was. As she and Blake stood together under the vast Utah sky, Delilah thought about all the women who were still scrubbing laundry while their brilliant minds went to waste. She thought about all the men like Blake who had not yet learned to look past convention to see real talent, and she made a silent promise to continue being an example, to continue proving that gifts should be valued regardless of who possesses them, to continue building a world where talent was never wasted when there was work that needed doing. I love you, Blake murmured, his lips brushing her temple. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate rancher who needed help. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate woman who needed to be seen, Delilah replied. We saved each other, Blake. That is what makes this so perfect. And under the endless stars of the Utah Territory, with the ranch they had built together surrounding them and the family they had created sleeping safely inside, Blake and Delilah Anderson held each other close and knew that they had found something rare and precious, a partnership of equals, a love built on respect and recognition, and a future limited only by their shared imagination and determination. The story that had begun with wasted talent and desperate need had become a story of fulfillment and purpose. The cowboy had given her work that matched her gifts, and in return, she had given him a partnership that exceeded anything he could have imagined. Together, they had proven that when talent is recognized and valued, when gifts are honored rather than dismissed, extraordinary things become possible. This was their legacy, written not just in ledgers and contracts, but in the way they loved each other, raised their children, and lived their lives. This was their happy ending, though it was not really an ending at all. It was a beginning that continued to unfold with each new day, each new challenge, each new choice to see and value each other completely. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.